Okay, so it sounds like we have a majority of the folks here today. Um, what I want for us to really think about in today's time together is this idea of ethics. Okay, we talk about professional ethics in the sense of where we were in co-op number two. And if you've had me debrief from co-op number two, we think about ethics as a way of framing how we make decisions. I put out there to folks that when we think about the idea of professional ethics, it's within a specific lens based on our values, based on our profession. And so when we think about our personal ethics versus our professional ethics, I put out there to folks, are they one and the same? And in some instances, it's based on context, based on role, but for the most part, it is based on how we make decisions and the framework in which we make decisions. And so when we think about ethics, it is a way of how we're making choices and providing reason for that choice. I want for us to revisit today the idea of when we think about professional ethics as engineers. Okay, again, if you recall from the ePortfolio session, I asked you to define engineering. Right? I asked you to define what it meant for you to be an engineer, or in general, what is engineering. Okay? Now, really think about it in the sense of how do you make decisions as an engineer to solve problems or to insert your definition. Okay. Let me bring up for you again as a reminder our code of ethics. When you think about the professional code of ethics as mechanical engineers, okay, there is a set of guidelines that we follow. Okay, and so those are the guidelines are noted here. Right. Again, when we think about the idea of how ethics play in our role as engineers and also what that means within society. And I'm blowing this up for you. Again, when we think about the fundamental principles, it is about, using your skill for human welfare. Okay. So in a sense, we assume when we think about our ethics as engineers that we are doing good. Okay. That we are, whatever it is that we're doing, we are imparting good on society. Right. Being honest and impartial and serving with fidelity serving with fidelity their clients and the public. Meaning that when we think about what we do in terms of improving society, that it is honest, impartial, unbiased, and serving a specific population or constituency group. Okay. In the end, the third statement here, we're striving to increase the competence and prestige of the engineering profession, right? So in a sense, not only are we doing good for society and our clients, but also the profession, okay? So when we think about that, it is broken down into 19 different statements of what we can and cannot do. Again, the idea of holding safety. So when we think about ethics, the value of safety or guideline of safety is paramount. When we think about holding ourselves accountable, it is within a specific due process, right? And in the end, we're endeavoring to not only better ourselves, but better the profession and furthering and promoting engineering, specifically mechanical engineering, to those who may follow after, not only not less, but greater than was transmitted to ourselves. Okay. And so when we think about our ethics, in this set of guidelines was adopted in 1976, as we see here. It was realigned in 2012. And so when we think about the ethics of an organization, it comes down to these three fundamental principles or values, if you will, as the basis for all our fundamental decisions and guidelines and how we make decisions. Okay. The question then becomes, when we look at these principles, when we look at these guidelines, how do we frame that? Okay. And so I offer you today this idea of moral frameworks. Okay. When we think about the moral framework, think about how you make decisions. Think about how you arrive to a decision. Okay. Yes, it is based on data. Yes, it is based on logic. Yes, it's based on fact. Okay. When we think about big T and little t and the idea of truth, that's not what I'm aiming at here. What I'm aiming at is the how, and how not only what you look at, but how you organize that decision making. Okay? So I offer for you 3 different frameworks. Okay, these are off. These are, and I'll post a more in-depth article on this onto Canvas soon after class. But I want you to think about 3 different types of frameworks. Okay, and then we'll apply this in another activity. So the first one is the consequentialist framework. Okay, the key thing here is maximize pleasure, minimize the pain. Right. When we think about the deliberative process, what kinds of outcomes should you try to produce? Okay, that's one thing to consider. We focus on directing attention to future effects of an action. For all people who will be directly or indirectly affected by the action. Okay, so we're looking at future impact. We're looking at not only impact of decision, but also impact on specific populations and constituency groups. The definition of ethical conduct here, from a consequentialist framework point of view, is that the action that will achieve the best consequences. Okay, again, maximize pleasure, minimize the pain, or in another sense, maximize your benefit as opposed to your cost. Okay. When we think about a consequentialist framework, the motivation that we see here is that we aim to produce the most good, the most benefit, the most, and maximizing a solution to a problem. Okay, so that's the consequentialist framework. The second one is actually that of duty. And the way we summarize that sense of duty is that it motives over consequence, duty to follow ethical rules. Okay, so your motives over the consequence, right? And then you have to follow a specific set of rules. When we think about the deliberative process here, what are my obligations in the situation, or what are the things that I should never do? Not what I should do, but what should I never do? Okay? In a sense, we have a framework where there's a lot of boundary or rules that we have to follow. Okay. When we think about the focus of this framework, the focus directs attention to the duties that exist prior to the situation and determines obligations. So we're not looking at what happens in the future, but now we're looking at where we are in the present, right? And what do we see as our duty? What do we see as our responsibility within the present to solve the problem, right? When we think about the definition of ethical conduct involves doing the right thing and never failing to do one's duty. So when we think about that, it's within a specific set of rules, right? And our motivation here is to perform the right action. Okay. Now, what is right is based on what? Our structure, the rules that we have. Okay. It may be what you personally value, okay, but within your role, right? Yeah. Is there a right action based on the role, based on the values? Going back to our professional code of ethics here, is that right? When we think about this idea of what we professionally can do is right versus what we personally can do is right, there are mitigating consequences here, right? And in a sense, you have to make the decision of how you place your personal value versus your professional value, right? That's entirely up to you. The other parts of that too is when we think about the idea of your personal versus professional values, for many folks who've had me debrief their co-op experiences, when we talk about the mixing of values, is there schism, alignment, or compromise, right? schism in the idea where there is conflict between what you personally feel versus what you professionally feel. Compromise in the sense of you take one over the other, and at the same time also you're making a compromise. You're compromising one set of values over another based on a decision, right? And then in alignment, they're both. I mean, they both align perfectly well, right? And so when we think about the idea of duty, right? It is to perform the right action, right? Again, but based on the values and the platform that you speak of, or the platform or values that you're viewing the situation from. Right? Finally, we have that of virtue, the framework of virtue. And when we think about the deliberative process of virtue, is that, what kind of person should I be or try to be? And what will my actions show about my character, right? So when we think about how we solve this problem, we're thinking about a consequence to you personally, right? The focus attempts to discern character traits that are or could be motivating people involved in the situation, okay? And so when we think about this, when we think about a moral dilemma, when we think about a problem here, we're thinking about the impact of you as the decision maker. What are the optics? What do the optics say? When we think about a decision where it's either right or wrong, in some instances, you are from a virtuous framework. You're considering how it looks on you, how it impacts you, your character, and your image. Okay. Ethical conduct here is whatever a fully virtuous person would do in the circumstance. Okay. So when we think about the values and vices and traits here, that is the impact here. Okay. And the motivation from a virtuous standpoint, or virtuous framework, is the idea of developing one's character. Okay. So there are other frameworks, and we could take a deeper dive on the specific areas of ethics. But I think that when we think about the different frameworks and theories of ethical decision making, these three, consequentialist, duty, and virtue, actually are pretty broad frameworks for us to consider how we make decisions and explain our decision-making process. Okay. When we think about how we apply that in a situation, right? We think about really, how we apply that, but more importantly, what we apply it to. Okay. And so I offer for you today this idea of a case study, and that of a self-driving car. Okay. It is becoming more and more prevalent in society. It is an issue that has been in engineering news, but there are some ethics behind that, and the idea of which way to turn, which way, and how to, and there are consequences to the actions that are made by a driverless vehicle, right? And so have a quick video for you to sort of help frame the idea of the video. So here you go.
Should self-driving cars make ethical decisions? That is the growing debate as the technology moves closer towards mainstream reality. A new study published in Science magazine asks how self-driving cars should act. More than 75% of participants in one survey favored cars that would sacrifice one passenger rather than kill 10 pedestrians. But overall, the study found people prefer to ride in a driverless car that protects passengers at all cost. CBS News contributor Nicholas Thompson is editor of the New Yorker magazine's website, NewYorker.com. Nick, good morning.
Good morning, Charlie.
So what are we learning here?
Well, we're learning that this is a very interesting frontier that we're about to cross. When you make a driverless car, you have to put in all kinds of decisions about how you drive on the road, but you're also going to have to program ethics in a way that society hasn't really dealt with. How do you deal with a situation where somebody is crossing the road in front of you, and to avoid it, you would have to swerve off the bridge? That is something you'll have to write into the software. How we make those decisions is very complicated. What we've learned in the study is, as you say, people, when they look and they think, well, you know what? The best way to make these decisions, totally utilitarian. If you can save two people, if you kill one to save two, you should do that.
Am I one of the ones that signs?
Are you? Well,
Yeah.
Depends if you're a pedestrian or if you're in the car as a passenger, right?
Yeah.
You know, people, when they think about how they want the system to be designed, want sort of the most good for the most number, classic utilitarianism. When they think about their own vehicles, they want the most good maybe for me.
them.
Yeah, this reminds me of my ethics 101 class in college at Georgetown University. But these are not just philosophical issues, they're going to involve legal issues too, right?
Right, they're going to, because as the car software is set, those are decisions that the company can be made. So you can imagine a scenario where a car does something and then a lawyer says, well, you know what? The manufacturer's at fault because of the way they programmed in the morality into the software.
Even if it's from moral dilemma, you argue that this is more important to have driverless cars than not.
Well, for a couple of reasons. Number one, the number of accidents, I think, will be dramatically reduced by driverless cars, right? Remember, driverless cars don't drink, they don't text, right? So you're going to have, and they have a lot more information. When they're on that bridge, they're going to know exactly where the wall is.
They don't fall asleep either.
They don't fall asleep, right? So driverless cars will massively improve safety, right? But they just open this whole new frontier of decisions that we are usually making instinctively. So they'll be making the same decisions with a lot more information. They'll probably make better decisions, but they're still complex decisions.
And who decides what is programmed into the decision-making process?
Well, you can imagine that it could be the government. The government could say, you know what? We have to do X, Y, and Z. Here are some standards. Here are some rules. Here are some principles. You can imagine that it's sort of left up to the manufacturer. You can imagine that there are kind of gradations on the cars that are sold. All these things are possible. We haven't really thought through these things as a society, but they're quite important.
But then when you lay out the questions, you sound like a bit of a heel because you want to save yourself as opposed to the pedestrians.
Right. So you can imagine, so perhaps the best solution.
I'm going to vote for me. I'm not kidding. I'm going to vote for me. I don't want to hit a child. But if it comes to, you know, my life or somebody else's, why wouldn't you save your own life?
Okay, well, what if it's two? What if it's three? What if
See,
it's
that's what I'm
1,000?
saying.
Right. So where do you put the gradations?
What about your
Everybody, it's
children
different.
who are the
What if it's
pedestrians?
somebody
Well, my
What
children
about
is
your
different.
children?
My children is different.
Suppose
My
you're going to
children
kill
is
the
different.
person that's going to discover a cure to cancer.
Right. Or
No, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
so what you have to have is you have to have a set of principles.
Wait, Charlie, wait a second. What would you do? It's you or a pedestrian. And it's, you know, I don't know anything about this pedestrian. It's just you or a pedestrian, just a regular guy walking down the street.
In an
What I
ordeal.
do?
Yeah.
I would
If
break.
I was driving,
I would just break.
No, you have to
To
make a
save both of
decision.
us.
That would be
in other
the
words,
ideal
you're
thing.
saying you have to make a decision. You
You have
don't
to
have
make
a
a
choice to
decision.
avoid the choice. You don't
Yes.
have a choice to avoid the
Yes,
choice.
yes. What would you do?
I would probably save myself,
Okay.
probably. But if I knew that person, you know, more about that person, which you don't know,
Right.
you know, you might
Okay.
make a different decision.
Okay.
Nick,
All right. Thank you, Nick. Thank
you don't
very
think we're
much.
crazy, do you?
No.
I actually think, you know what I like about this conversation? It's a chance for society to like set up morals again, right? This is
Right.
a great opportunity.
Right.
Thank
do
you,
we
Nick.
really want to abandon those moral decisions to technology?
No.
Right. Thanks, Nick.
We don't.
So things to consider, right? When we think about the idea of driverless vehicles, yes, it provides convenience. Yes, it may reduce or enhance efficiencies and reduce redundancy. It may offer all sorts of things, right? But as engineers now, think about it. As an engineer, what is your responsibility in that? When we apply your ethics to a situation like driverless cars, right? As engineers, you have the knowledge, you have the opportunity to program something into a vehicle. Okay. What is your responsibility in that case? When we think about programming morality into a vehicle, what considerations are there when we try to, when we look back at our fundamental principles? If we're trying to enhance human welfare, if we're trying to improve society, if we're trying to increase new knowledge here, enhance new knowledge when it comes to driverless cars, as engineers right here, right now, in the present, what is our responsibility? Some folks may take a utilitarian approach, as mentioned in the video, greatest good for the greatest number, right? Or you may take a Marxist approach, as one student did last fall, where, from a Marxist approach, I as a consumer are going to pay someone to offer me the best vehicle possible. And as an engineer, your aim is to provide the one that is more efficient and cost effective. But again, from a moral perspective, where does that come from, right? So some framework for us to consider, right? When we think about this idea of our morality, more so our responsibility, if you will, as engineers. So for our activity, what I'm going to do is offer another video for you. This is a TED Talk with some interactive questions. And so what I'm going to do is, as the video, when we get to I'm going to show the video. When we get to the questions, I'll throw the questions on the screen. And then if you would respond in the chat, which way you would answer. Okay. So let me, first off, provide us some more context here and talk about the ethical dilemma of self-driving vehicles from a TED Talk.
This is a thought experiment. Let's say at some point in the not-so-distant future, you're barreling down the highway in your self-driving car, and you find yourself boxed in on all sides by other cars. Suddenly, a large, heavy object falls off the truck in front of you. Your car can't stop in time to avoid the collision, so it needs to make a decision. Go straight and hit the object, swerve left into an SUV, or swerve right into a motorcycle. Should it prioritize your safety by hitting the motorcycle, minimize danger to others by not swerving, even if it means hitting the large object and sacrificing your life? Or take the middle ground by hitting the SUV, which has a high passenger safety rating? So what should the self-driving car do? If we were driving that boxed-in car in manual mode, whichever way we'd react would be understood as just that, a reaction, not a deliberate decision. It would be an instinctual, panicked move with no forethought or malice. But if a programmer were to instruct the car to make the same move, given conditions it may sense in the future, well, that looks more like premeditated homicide. Now, to be fair, self-driving cars are predicted to dramatically reduce traffic accidents and fatalities by removing human error from the driving equation. Plus, there may be all sorts of other benefits: eased road congestion, decreased harmful emissions, and minimized unproductive and stressful driving time. But accidents can and will still happen, and when they do, their outcomes may be determined months or years in advance by programmers or policymakers. And they'll have some difficult decisions to make. It's tempting to offer up general decision principles like minimize harm, but even that quickly leads to morally murky decisions. For example, let's say we have the same initial setup, but now there's a motorcyclist wearing a helmet to your left and another one without a helmet to your right. Which one should your robot car crash into? If you say the biker with the helmet, which is more likely to survive, then aren't you penalizing the responsible motorist? If instead you say the biker without the helmet because he's acting irresponsibly, then you've gone way beyond the initial design principle about minimizing harm, and the robot car is now meting out street justice. The ethical considerations get more complicated here. In both of our scenarios, the underlying design is functioning as a targeting algorithm of sorts. In other words, it's systematically favoring or discriminating against a certain type of object to crash into. And the owners of the target vehicles will suffer the negative consequences of this algorithm through no fault of their own. Our new technologies are opening up many other novel ethical dilemmas. For instance, if you had to choose between a car that would always save as many lives as possible in an accident, or one that would save you at any cost, which would you buy? What happens if the cars start analyzing and factoring in the passengers of the cars and the particulars of their lives? Could it be the case that a random decision is still better than a predetermined one designed to minimize harm? And who should be making all of these decisions anyhow? Programmers? Companies? Governments? Reality may not play out exactly like our thought experiments, but that's not the point. They're designed to isolate and stress test our intuitions on ethics, just like science experiments do for the physical world. Spotting these moral hairpin turns now will help us maneuver the unfamiliar road of technology ethics and allow us to cruise confidently and conscientiously into our brave new future.
So let's begin. When we look at the questions here, and again, I'll have you respond in the chat. In the first scenario, which option would best protect the autonomous car and its occupants? And we talk about the car swerving, right? Where if something comes out of the truck and you're in the lane, do you swerve left or do you swerve right? In the chat, select the car does not swerve and stays in the lane. B, the car swerves towards the large SUV. C, none of the above. Or D, the car swerves towards the motorcyclist. Yeah. Two. Looking at the chat vote here. 1. Okay, so it was a toss-up between D and B. I think the D's have it. And so if we select D, oh, shoot, I forgot to log in. Sorry, forgot. Okay. Next question. Oh. In the second scenario, which option would you follow the design principle to minimize harm? A, swerve toward the motorcyclist with the helmet. B, the car does not swerve and stays in the lane. C, the car swerves towards the motorcyclist without the helmet. Or D, none of the above. What would you select? And then the second scenario is where you hit one motorcyclist versus the other. I count right. I think a majority said B. Okay. Try again. The other one says A. That is correct. Okay. If a robot car reacts exactly as a human would in a crash scenario, which would be true? Okay. A random number machine is needed since some human actions are random. B, the same actions should result in the same legal consequences. C, none of the above. Or D, impossible. The sensors on a robot car will enable it to avoid crashes. What is your response? Okay, everyone said, majority says C. That is correct. All right. What other ethical dilemmas are mentioned here about autonomous cars? A, determining the value of your life versus the lives of others. B, whether it should take a parking spot away from a human driver who's looking for one. C, whether advertisers may influence the route selection of the car. Or D, none of the above. So your clear majority here says A. That's correct. Right. How are these thought experiments like science experiments? Okay. So A, they can safely recreate actual scenarios without any risk of injury. B, they aren't necessarily meant to recreate actual scenarios. C, they're not alike. One involves a lab experiment or lab equipment. The other doesn't involve lab equipment. Or D, none of the above. Clear majority says A. So I'm going to select A. That wasn't it. Second most answer was I believe C. Nope, wasn't it.
Anyhow, programmers, companies, governments, reality may not play out exactly like our thought experiments. But that's not the point. They're designed to isolate and stress test our intuitions on ethics, just like science experiments do for the physical world. Spotting these moral hairpin turns now will help us maneuver the unfamiliar road of technology ethics and allow us to cruise confidently and conscientiously into our brave new future.
So Jeffrey says D. Oh, B. All right, 3 more questions. We'll go to the next one because this is this is open-ended, but I want for you to think about this. Which design principle for crash decisions seems most ethical to you and why? To minimize harm, protect the driver over other drivers, treat everyone equally, hand back control to the driver, follow the law, or something else. Okay, so when we think about the design principles that are listed here, just in your mind, just think about what is the most ethical to you, right? And when we think about that idea, the ethical frameworks, right, that I presented earlier, how does the ethical framework justify you selecting that okay. Another thing to consider. The crash scenarios that were presented, recall the target you said the robot car should swerve into, okay? Whether it be the large SUV, the motorcyclist with or without the helmet. Does your answer change if you or your loved ones were the target instead of an anonymous stranger, okay? What does that say about your ethics? It goes back to the that portion of the video of CBS News this morning, and Charlie Rose posed the question: if you knew who it was, would your decision change? Okay, or if you knew that the person was going to create a cure for cancer, or if it was your loved one, does that justify or impact your decision making? Something to think about. And then finally, when an ethics judgment is needed, who should get to decide how robot cars are programmed? Is it the engineer? Is it the manufacturer? Meaning that of the executives and so forth? Is it the government? Is it the owner of the vehicle, the general public, or someone else? Okay. When we think about our roles as engineers, should we be at the top of that list? And by no means is this list that's featured here in any particular order, right? But when we think about who gets to decide the robot, right? Who gets to decide the AI within the vehicle? Who should it be and why? Right? If it's not someone on this list, who should it be? Right? In the end, if it is an engineer, what framework are we coming from? What values are we putting into a car? Something to consider. Okay. So I will post this the link to. I'll post this link to the exercise in Canvas for you. And I will also post for you another activity that you can do on your own. It's actually developed by MIT, the folks at MIT, and it's called the Morality Machine. It's very similar to this exercise, but you actually get to pick and choose, and you get to see you get to see the potential impact of the decisions that you're making. So I'll post that for your enjoyment or not enjoyment, but enhancement of learning and reflection later on. Okay. Are there any general questions at this time?
I saw on Canvas that the About Me portion of the e-portfolio is due today.
Yes.
Where is that supposed to be turned in?
Actually, there should when you submit the assignment, there's a field and put your link or your URL, and that is the assignment submission.
Okay, because I just saw the one submission for the entire e-portfolio. I didn't want to prematurely submit when it's not done.
Yeah, and actually that is it. And so when after class today, or probably at the end of the week, what I will do is look through everyone's e-portfolios based on the URL and then assign a grade. Okay. And so when it is one submission, and please note that when it comes to the when you upload or when you built the page, you will assign a grade. And so for the next part, for part 2 of the portfolio, I believe that's for that is due in 2 weeks, right? And part 2 involves you a page on your co-op experiences, involvement, and leadership on campus, right? That is 40 points, and then I will just change the grade in the grade field for that portion. When you have it, then I will grade it. Okay. So it's like again, if you submitted an URL for your About Me for your e-portfolio, and I view the e-portfolio and see the About Me page, then I will assign points to that page.
Okay.
And then just click submit, and then I will view it and then grade.
You said you're not going to be grading them until like later this week?
Yes, because I'm going to grade everyone from also the Thursday class as well.
Okay, so any chance that we can have a couple more days to do it?
Sure.
Okay, great. Thank you.
record. And for folks, as a reminder, the due dates are posted on the syllabus, and then details on the assignment are also featured on the syllabus. And Daniel, I'll look into posting the due dates on the calendar. Other questions? How do you schedule debrief meetings? Actually, when it comes to a debrief meeting, this class is your debrief meeting, okay? But if you have specific questions of me, and I will post this in the chat and also the announcements. I recently created a page for people to schedule meetings with me. It's been, ever since I came back from Arizona, I've been trying to get this up and running. The Starfish platform is not working for me right now. And then at the same time, also Handshake is also not working for me. Let me post it in the link right now. Or post it in the chat. And so again, that's the way to, that I just created it. So that will be a good way to schedule meetings with me. And other questions? I'm trying to scan the chat here. Stephen, yes, I'll hang out afterwards. Okay. If there are no more questions, I will post this, like I said, examples for the e-portfolios. Examples for the e-portfolios are actually on the syllabus, and you go to, and I'll post this on the chat here. And then if you go to the final page, the password is Bearcats, lowercase. There is a page for class of 18 e-portfolios, and so that is posted on there. Okay. All right. There are no more questions. Thank you all for coming today. And then I'll post these materials on Canvas very soon. Thanks.